What is going on, Legion fans? James Hancock here, back to review Chapter 16 of Legion. I threw out my usual net trying to gather some Legion-related news, but there wasn't really any news between last week and this week, apart from just people discussing some of the mysteries and some of the questions that were introduced at the end of last week's episode. I saw a lot of people hypothesizing that the Migo monk and Fukuyama were one and the same. While ordinarily this show likes to raise more questions than it answers, at the very least it gave us a nice introductory scene where we got to see the origin story of Fukuyama. We see Patanomy in the mainframe of Fukuyama looking in on this conversation between Sid and David. And it's a pretty amusing little lover's quarrel because Sid's a little bewildered by David's statement that David is no longer speaking to Sid in the future. Dating someone can be complicated enough, but it gets doubly so when you're kind of sort of dating somebody in two different timelines. But after one of the most jaw-dropping opening credit sequences of the entire season, which is basically just a lot of ones and zeros inside the mainframe of Fukuyama, I feel like this show deserves like its own special Emmy Award just for opening title sequences and how they're different each episode. But we see through Patanomy's eyes the origin of Fukuyama, and we basically see how at age 17 he was handpicked to be part of an experiment where he would be potentially part of the first line of defense of this new race of mutants that has the ability to read minds. It was a particularly gruesome sequence, just seeing them like drilling holes in his head and hooking him up to everything. Something tells me this poor boy didn't have the entirety of the plan explained to him in advance, but as we see, he was not in fact a Migo monk, although, as Patanomy sees, the Migo monk, part of him is still trapped in the mainframe because the monk was trying to hack Fukuyama, and as a result, Fukuyama kind of hacked the monk. And now through one of Fukuyama's vermilions, Patanomy is able to communicate to David the location of the Shadow King. So for people who like the plot to move along at a nice brisk pace, I feel like this episode opened on very strong footing, answered some questions, pushed things along, and it appeared to set the end game in motion for the rest of the season. Because as we see over the course of the rest of the episode, the Shadow King and David now are in a massive race to find the Shadow King's body, with the most likely ending being that whoever gets to the body first will basically be able to determine the fate of the entire world. One of the other mysteries from last week's episode was who the old woman was in the mainframe, and I saw some people were suspecting that it was another physical manifestation of the Eye who died in season 1. I don't know if I 100% buy that because in this episode we do see how Patanomy interacts with a faceless entity, and as they have their exchange, that's what allows Patanomy to go into one of the vermilions. So whether or not we'll see anything more about that old woman inside the mainframe, who knows, because this show is more than happy to let some mysteries linger for a very long time. But if 11 episodes is all we get before the end of Legion as we know it, and we definitely haven't seen any news yet as to whether or not either Noah Hawley or FX want to continue. Some have rightly pointed out that the reason he's getting that extra 11th episode is a way of wrapping things up and bringing things to a close. If that's true, that'll be sad on one hand, but I hope it'll give Noah Hawley a chance to wrap up all these dangling storylines if he chooses to. My hope is that Noah Hawley will continue to turn his eye toward the stranger corners of the Marvel Universe in the years to come. I'm wearing a shirt for MODOK or MODOK. I've never quite been sure how to say his name correctly, but he's one of my favorite strange creations by Jack Kirby from the 1960s. And I feel like if there's a writer or director who was put on this earth to give this creature his own standalone movie, Noah Hawley would certainly be the guy. So for the rest of the episode, we see David and the Shadow King racing to find the Shadow King's body in Lodisole, I believe is the name. I wasn't quite sure. Lodisole is basically a vast desert that's always changing, including the location of this monastery where all the monks came from. The Shadow King has an interesting meeting with somebody who used to work for him, who clearly was his driver at one point, but she was there at his funeral, so the Shadow King asks where his body is. It was a little strange that it was so quick and easy for the Shadow King to find this location because it's been such a major mystery for everybody else. In any case, he rewards her with a perpetual, endless dream of driving to music, something that gives her great pleasure. And as the Shadow King and Oliver are driving across the desert, Oliver recites a poem, and I'm embarrassed to admit, even though I was an English major, I did not recognize the poem. Something about America and $2.37. I tried looking on Google to figure out what it was. I was unsuccessful. So if you know what poem Oliver was reciting, please let me know. But we see that David's finally hatching something resembling a master plan, and we only get little bits and flashes, but he walks around to all the major characters, including Lenny and Carrie and Clark, and we see him snapping his fingers and giving them little assignments, and we get brief little flashes of what might be required of them, like we see Lenny in the desert with a sniper rifle. We also see a shot of Clark and all the Vermilions out in the desert. The reason David has to be so careful is that any information he feeds to his friends, that information could be extracted by the Shadow King because he's a telepath. But David leaves a little note for Sid saying he's going off to kill the monster, and initially he goes off into the desert by himself. And we get this beautiful sequence with a lot of long, slow wipes and split screens and multiple images all happening simultaneously. I don't know if this was an overt homage or not, but the opening credit sequence to Sam Peckinpah's film Ballad of Cable Hogue employs a very similar technique. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Noah Hawley at some point had seen the Peckinpah film, but whether or not it was an overt nod or not, who knows. But Ballad of Cable Hogue, very cool Western from 1970, I believe, so if you're a Western fan, definitely check that out. But probably the most moving scene in this episode is when Clark and Sid sit down together to discuss what to do about David, because on one hand, Sid feels like she and David are growing apart, or that their relationship now is quite different from where it was in the insane asylum. And Clark tells her a very interesting story about how when he was in the army, he was in love with somebody, and he kept chasing this fella so much that the guy started making a habit of jumping out of planes in order to stay away from him, until eventually, one day, inevitably, one of those parachutes did not open. But Sid finally decides the best way to save David and the world is to protect love as she understands it. So she decides to pursue David, literally parachutes in from a jet, arrives, kicks him in the shin, gives him a stern talking to, and they continue to explore the desert together. Meanwhile, David opens up Lenny's cell from a distance, and she hauls ass off on a motorcycle. We see in the teaser for the next episode that Lenny's partying her face off, but something tells me that's all part of David's master plan. But also we saw that Amy will be returning as well, so that'll be interesting to see how Amy and Lenny interact while Lenny's off partying with Amy's body. But I don't want to get ahead of myself because we get another really fascinating sequence narrated by John Hamm. And I had to access some very old memories to understand the cultural reference point of this particular sequence, because when I was a teenager, when I was studying Greek history and ancient civilizations, we did dabble in the world of Greek philosophy. And while I will not claim to have read Plato's Republic in its entirety, nor did I read The Cave in its entirety, this is basically a short film inspired by Plato's The Cave. It's a story about people sitting in a cave, looking at shadows on the wall, and that is all they understand of the world, that the outside world is totally incomprehensible to them because they've never experienced it, nor do they even wish to experience it. And that basically a philosopher is somebody who breaks the chains and goes out into the outside world to experience things firsthand. That if a philosopher were to try to explain even something as simple as the image of the sun to people who are trapped in the cave, it would be completely incomprehensible. So first and foremost, my hat is off to Noah Hawley for bringing in ancient Greek philosophy into a show that's ostensibly based on a superhero from Marvel Comics. That's definitely a first as far as I'm aware of in pop culture entertainment. But they use Plato's Cave as a springboard for John Hamm to give a lesson about the most alarming delusion of all, that other people do not matter. And that basically in today's world, with everybody living on their devices and looking at their devices at all time, that we're very similar to the people that Plato describes in the cave. We're basically seeing shadows of reality, not actual reality, and that if we ever were to put our devices away and actually look at the world with our open eyes, we might even find it quite alarming or incomprehensible because we prefer this world through our devices. And as a result, we all become very narcissistic, almost as if we're the only people who are real and everybody else that we meet online, they're merely shadows. Whether or not this lecture has anything to do with the larger story of Legion, or if it was just a chance for Noah Hawley to offer a critique of online culture, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But personally, I love these little essays and asides. I think they're brilliantly executed. And once again, like I said, this is the first time where Marvel Comics and Plato have collided in the world of television. So at the very least, this was a first in the world of entertainment. So the episode starts to draw to a close as this massive thunderstorm erupts in the desert. Sid and David seek shelter in a tent, and they find themselves in a bit of like a time loop where they come in and they keep experiencing it over and over again, but in this tent are their skeletons. And I don't know if this is like a psychic trap that the Shadow King has set in order to keep them busy while he looks for his body, but in the short term, David and Sid seem to be trapped in this particular tent. But back in Division 3, we see that Melanie has a mission as well, and it seems like while David and Sid might be trapped, all the other pieces on the chessboard are absolutely in play. But when it comes to the very end, I'm actually going to need a little bit of help from some of the other viewers out there, because I was watching the show on Sling, and the show basically started to malfunction in the final seconds. I saw Farouk and Oliver basically navigating this cave, and I saw these images of like a skeletal minotaur, but the episode kept freezing until the commercials began. And in spite of the fact that I'd actually set up the episode to be recorded on Sling, when I tried playing it back after the fact, once again, during that part, it kept freezing and crashing and throwing me out of the app. So I really don't know what happened in the final seconds, apart from the fact that Farouk was navigating these caves in the monastery, saw this skeletal minotaur, but I don't know if he found his body. I don't know what the hell happened, so please let me know. I really don't want to have to pay like $3 to buy the episode and watch it on Amazon just to get the last few seconds. But that's really all I got this week. I'm hoping we'll see a giant battle royale between the Shadow King and David. Something tells me that David will not only destroy the Shadow King, but that he'll kind of go stark raving mad and threaten to absolutely obliterate the rest of the world, because as Noah Hawley teased a few episodes ago, the show will end with David fighting the future, whatever the hell that means. But with only 3 episodes to go, I'm sure it's going to be absolutely fascinating every step of the way. So I hope you enjoyed my recap and review. If you're feeling the itch to get philosophical, definitely hunt down Plato's The Cave. I've read a lot of Greek tragedies and a lot of Greek mythology. I haven't read a lot of Greek philosophy. At any rate, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. I recently crossed the 5,000 subscriber mark, so that was a cool little benchmark to get over. But if you want to talk to me, you can always hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax, or just leave me a comment in the comments below. But later this week, I've got a review of the new episode of The Expanse coming up. I'm going to be reviewing Solo on Thursday, so lots of fun stuff on the horizon. So I hope you'll tune back in for all those reviews. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Onwards and upwards.